Okay, class. So I guess some of you is on the way, okay, to join the Google Meet. Okay. Ada lecture kan? Max. So I hope that you are not tepu yet for my lecture. So please listen to this lecture. Kita tengok walaupun dah petang, kan dah petang macam ni, but I still like, hope that you have the energy, okay, for this lecture session. Okay, so today's lecture we are going to look at the next chapter, chapter 5. We have another 3 chapters to go. Okay, chapter 5 on hormonal and nervous communication, and then we have chapter 7 on immune system. Dua chapter ni chapter yang agak besar dan banyak mechanism. And then the last chapter is on respiratory system. So this one has been covered bukan semualah during the mass lecture hari tu. Okay, at least you have the idea for respiratory system, so lebih kurang sama lah. Okay, and then okay, let's look at chapter 5, hormonal and nervous communication. Okay, by looking at this statement dikatakan basically for this chapter, it is the chapter where we are going to look at how your body is coordinated. Okay, how your cells communicate, okay, through the release of hormones by the endocrine glands, and also through the transmission of impulse. Okay, basically hormones and transmission of impulse, it shows you how cell communicates, how cell interact, okay, how cell is regulated, right? Okay, so chapter overview. Okay, tengok dulu semua apa dia. Okay, so if we look at this slide, basically in this chapter we are going to look at how cell communicates. So cell communicate through the release of chemical molecules. So chemical molecule in this case is hormones. Okay, so hormones are produced and secreted by endocrine glands. Okay, so the endocrine gland secretes the hormones, and then the hormone will be circulating in your blood, okay, in your circulatory system, until it reaches the target organs, okay, the target cells. Okay, so the cells that has receptor for the hormone will only respond. Okay, hanya sel-sel yang ada reseptor pada hormon tersebut yang akan respond. For example, okay, we know that during the last chapter, which is on reproductive system, the anterior pituitary gland, it secretes the hormone FSH and LH, okay, follicle stimulating hormone and LH luteinizing hormone for both male and female. Dia terhasil dekat pituitary gland in your brain, but the target organ is the gonads. Jauh dia nak pergi, dia nak pergi jauh tu, cara dia macam mana? It travels in your blood circulation. Okay, so only cells that have receptor for the hormone will respond. Okay, so in the case of FSH and LH, it goes to the gonad. For male is the testis. Okay, is testis that leads to the secretion of other hormone, which is testosterone for male. And then for female, it goes to the ovary. Okay, it goes to the ovary and causes the release of secondary oocytes, and then the follicle. It causes the ovary to secrete estrogen, progesterone also. Okay, so estrogen, progesterone secreted, produced and secreted by the ovary. It affects the uterus, kan? So we have different glands, they secrete different organs that goes to different target organs, target cells, to instruct the cell to do certain works. Okay. So and then itu secara chemical, kan? A cell communicate through chemical molecule, which is hormone. And then another way of how cell communicate is through the transmission of electrical impulse. Okay, so kita macam contoh kita belajar homeostasis hari tu kan, bila ada perubahan dari segi physical and chemical factors that is detected by the sensor. Okay, so the sensor, it involves the sensory neuron, and then the impulse will be transmitted to your brain for interpretation. What is the corrective mechanism? And then from the interneuron, the impulse will travel to motor neuron to carry out the corrective mechanism. Okay, so that is the transmission of impulse. So through the transmission of impulse, it can cause your muscle to contract. It can cause or triggers endocrine gland to secrete hormones. So it can lead to other cells to carry out certain other work, macam itulah. So that one is electrical signal. For a neuron to transmit impulse, it has to generate impulse first. Generate impulse, transmit impulse from one neuron to another neuron. So from one neuron to another neuron, the transmission of impulse, it occurs through synapse. Okay, synapse. So there's two types of synapse. Apa apa chemical synapse and electrical synapse. Okay, so if it involves chemical synapse, it involves the release of neurotransmitter. Macam itulah kan, neurotransmitter. So basically for the transmission of impulse, what is impulse actually? Impulse is where there's movement of ions in and out of neurons. Okay, the ion that involve usually is sodium ions and A plus, and also potassium ion in and out of the cell that causes membrane potential to change. Okay, voltage to change across cells. Okay, so nanti kita akan tengoklah electrical signal, electrical transmission of impulse tu. Okay, so this is basically, sekejap, okay, kat sini. Okay, for hormones, we are going to look at the classes of hormones. So there are hormones that are made up of proteins or polypeptide chains, or amines. Amines are modified amino acids. Okay, modified amino acids, and then there are also hormones that are made up of steroids. Okay, such as estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. FSH, LH tu semua protein. Okay, hormones that are made up of protein. Insulins are made up of proteins. Okay, and then based on the composition of the hormone, whether it is made up of polypeptide chain, amines, or steroid, it determines the way of how the hormone works, the mechanism of actions. Okay, so if for example the hormones are made up of steroid, it is lipid soluble hormones. Okay, so lipid soluble hormone, for example, this is the target cell. Okay, so every cell, it has receptor for the hormone. So for lipid soluble hormones, the receptor is located inside the cell. Receptor for the hormone is located inside cell. So for steroid hormone, because it is lipid soluble, the cell membrane is made up of phospholipid bilayer. Okay, phospholipid bilayer. So steroid hormone can diffuse through the phospholipid bilayer. That's why it is lipid soluble and bind to receptor which is located inside cell. Okay, inside the cell. And then it triggers a reaction to occur inside cell lah. But for the polypeptide chain, polypeptide, it is water soluble. Okay, for this type of hormone, the receptor is located on the plasma membrane of the cell. Okay, for this hormone, it binds to receptor on the plasma membrane. Okay, it causes a series of reaction to occur, which we call it as signal transduction, which is a series of reaction to occur inside cell to carry out certain mechanism. Okay, so that is the difference between lipid soluble, water soluble. Amines ni, it can be, depends on the type of hormone. It can be lipid soluble, it can be water soluble. Okay, so lipid soluble, remember that the receptor is inside cell. Water soluble, the receptor is located on the plasma membrane of the target cell. Okay, so all these hormones are produced and secreted by the endocrine glands. Okay, so ini yang pasal neurons lah. So neuron structure, types of neuron. Kita ada tadi apa? Sensory neurons, interneurons, motor neurons, and then neural signaling, transmission of impulse. Kita akan tengok ada graph to show action potential, and then we are going to look at neurotransmitter. Okay. Okay. So next, learning outcomes. So identify the chemical classes of hormones tadi lah. Steroid, amines, and polypeptide. identify endocrine glands and describe the actions of hormone, lipid soluble or water soluble. Okay, identify the different types of endocrine gland. Kita ada dekat brain ni, kita ada hypothalamus, kita ada pituitary gland, anterior, posterior, and then kita ada dekat neck region is the thyroid gland, and then we have the heart. Dekat heart ni kita ada on the upper part of the heart we have the thymus, okay, and then for the male we have the testis kat sini, and then for the female we have the ovary kan. So those are the endocrine glands, okay, and then kita ada kidney, atas kidney itu kita ada adrenal glands. So we have all different types of endocrine glands that produces different hormones with different target organs that regulate your body function, okay. And then compare the mechanism of hormone action, tadi water soluble, lipid soluble, okay. So these are the part for the hormone part, and then after that is for the neuron parts, okay. So describe the structure of neurons, describe the process involved in neural signaling, and then describe how a neuron transmit impulse, okay, and then describe compare endocrine and nervous system function. So basically these two endocrine system and also nervous system ni, endocrine glands and nervous system ni, is the way on how cell communicates. Endocrine, it involves chemical molecule. Nervous system, it involves transmission of electrical impulse, okay. So let's look at the first part first, cellular communication, okay, how cell communicates. So basically, one of the way of how cell communicate is through the release of hormones, okay. They are considered as signaling molecules, okay. So released by secreting cells into released by secreting cells into the extracellular fluid, okay. Kalau kat sini kan, kita contohnya kita ada endocrine gland lah, okay, so endocrine signaling. So the cells of the endocrine gland will produce and secrete the hormones. Before the hormone gets into your blood circulation, it enters into extracellular fluid lah, interstitial fluid, and then from there it diffuse into your blood capillaries, into your blood, okay. So circulate in the bloodstream, bind to specific target cells with receptors in the body, okay, and then trigger specific response pathway. So remember, if you look at this, for example, okay, so from this is the endocrine cells produce and secrete the hormones. The hormone enters into interstitial fluid and then diffuse into your blood circulation, and then travels along your blood vessels until it reaches the target cell. So in this case, as you can see, the receptor is located on the plasma membrane. So this is example of how water soluble hormone works, or the mechanism that involve water soluble. Water soluble, this hormone cannot enter into cell. It only binds to receptor on the plasma membrane and triggers a series of reaction to occur inside the target cell. Okay. Example of this type of hormone is hormone that is made up of proteins such as insulin. Okay, insulin. So insulin, it is produced by the pancreas, okay, and then the target cell can be your liver, it can be your muscle cell, your tissue cells, okay. So that when insulin binds to this type of cell, the liver, for example, it instructs the liver to take up glucose, okay, and then store glucose as glycogen. So it causes a series of reaction to occur inside the liver cell until glucose is converted into glycogen. Macam itulah kan. So and then hormone ni dia bukan macam enzyme. Enzyme is to catalyze the reaction. Hormone ni dia instruct cell to do certain work. Macam tu. Okay. Okay, so okay. Okay, we have a few types of how cell communicates. So cellular communication. So the first one is endocrine signaling lah. Endocrine signaling macam tadilah hormone kan. So we have the endocrine glands producing and secreting the hormones, okay, and the hormones secreted will travel in your blood circulation until it reaches the target cell with receptor for that hormone. Insulin dihasilkan oleh pancreas. It travels to the liver cell because the liver cell has receptor for the hormone. So insulin dia tak pergi ke jantung contohnya kan, dia tak akan effect jantung because the heart muscle doesn't respond to the insulin. Macam itulah. Okay, the insulin does not affects the ovary or the testes because the ovary and testes does not have receptor for the insulin. Vice versa lah semua macam tu. Okay, so endocrine signaling, endocrine cell release hormone that are transported to target cell through the bloodstream. And then that is endocrine. It involves hormones release and reach the target cell. Then we also have another type of cell communication which is autocrine. Okay, autocrine signaling. Hormone acts on the very cell that produces it. Okay, so kita contohnya kita ada diffuse intensity. Okay, ini contohnya kita akan tengok masa immune system, I suppose. Okay, so we have a cell. Okay, so this cell produces signaling molecule. Okay, so that signaling molecule affects its own cells. Macam tu lah kan, dia yang secret sendiri, dia apa signaling molecule tu akan affect diri dia sendiri. Contohnya nanti kita tengok masa immune system, we have white blood cells such as helper T cells, which secrete cytokines. Okay, helper T cells secrete cytokines to activate itself. Okay, to activate the helper T cell itself. So dia secret sendiri, dia signaling molecule tu akan affect diri dia sendiri. That is autocrine. Okay. So and then we have paracrine. Okay, paracrine signaling. So hormone diffuses through interstitial and acts on nearby target cells. So dia dekat-dekat je. Okay, so it does not travel through your blood circulation. Kan, right? So that is paracrine. So hormone diffuses through interstitial fluid and acts on nearby target cells. Dekat je. Sel yang target dia berdekatan saja. Tak perlu nak through the blood circulation. And then we have neuroendocrine signaling. Neuroendocrine cells release neurohormones that are transported by blood. Fungsi kita akan tengok hypothalamus, which is in the brain. Hanging from the hypothalamus, we have the pituitary gland. So pituitary gland ada. Sekejap, kenapa saya terdisconnect ke?
Madam.
Sekejap ya. dia senang disconnected. Dia letak tepi-tepi lah sebab takut terkeluar sebab saya guna desktop je ni. Okay, so I'm not going to display the big slide, okay, sebab saya nak kena share screens so that saya tahu saya online lagi, okay. Okay, so neuroendocrine signaling, secretory cells release hormones that are transported by blood or diffused through interstitial fluid. Okay, kalau you all tengok kan dekat sini, neuroendocrine glands itu adalah neurons yang selain fungsi dia untuk hasilkan untuk transmit impulse, neuron tu juga akan menghasilkan hormon, that is neurosecretory. Okay, neuron yang fungsi dia transmit impulse and at the same time produce and secrete hormones, that is neuroendocrine. Okay, ini kita tengok masa kita tengok bahagian hypothalamus dan juga apa nama posterior pituitary gland. Okay. Okay, so chemical classes of hormones. Okay, so chemical classes of hormones. We know that, okay, so there are hormones that are made up of polypeptides chain. There are protein hormones. Okay, so there are also hormones that are made up of modified amino acids, and there are hormones that are made up of steroids. Steroids are classes of lipid. Okay, one of the class of lipids. Okay, so example of water soluble hormones are protein hormones such as insulin. Okay, so insulin because it is made up of polypeptide chains, they are water soluble, they are hydrophilic. Okay, they are hydrophilic. Kena tengok balik chapter yang kita belajar semester lepas kan, macromolekul kan. Hormon yang macromolekul yang daripada protein yang structure dia adalah globular protein. So they are water soluble. Hormones, saya repeat balik hormones that are polypeptide, that is made up of polypeptide chains such as insulin. The shape of the hormone is globular protein. Okay, globular protein is hydrophilic, it is water soluble. But for the hormone that is made up of steroids, it is lipid soluble, it is hydrophobic. Okay, so example of steroid hormone is cortisol. Cortisol is a hormone secreted by the adrenal gland. Okay, adrenal gland. So adrenal gland secrete hormones, cortisol, which is steroids. Other example of steroid hormone is testosterone, sex hormone, estrogen, progesterone. So steroids, the structure is like this. Okay, it has 4 fused ring. Ingat tengok balik. The base structure sama dengan cholesterol. Cholesterol, we have learned before, it is the precursor molecule that is used to synthesize steroid hormones. So maksudnya nak hasilkan testosteron ke, estrogen ke, progesteron ke, cortisol ke, adalah daripada kolesterol. Okay. So and then we have amines. Okay, so amines, it depends. It can be water soluble, it can be lipid soluble. Example of amines that is water soluble is epinephrine. Okay, epinephrine is a water soluble hormones. And then for the thyroxine, it is lipid soluble, it is amine. Okay. Apa signifikannya water soluble and lipid soluble ni? It is determines the location of where the receptor for the hormone is located. Okay, for the water soluble hormone, receptor must be located on the plasma membrane of target cell. For lipid soluble, the receptor is located inside the target cell. Okay.
So we have discussed earlier that there are lipid-soluble hormone and water-soluble hormone. Now let's look at their mechanism of action.
Okay, tiba ada narration di situ. Okay, tak apa. Okay, so next, okay, we are going to look at first the mechanism of action for lipid-soluble hormones. Lipid soluble hormone are steroid hormones. Okay, so lipid soluble hormone unable to dissolve in the plasma portion of the of the blood, since they are not water soluble. Okay, attached to transport protein when carried in the bloodstream. Okay, kita tengok kat sini. Yang warna kuning ni, UR level ini adalah endocrine cells. Okay, this is endocrine cells, the cell that is responsible to produce and secrete the hormones. So as you can see, the when the hormone is produced by the endocrine cells ni, it can straight away produce the hormone. The hormone can diffuse through the plasma membrane and enters into the interstitial fluid and enters into your blood capillary. But unfortunately for this hormone, because it is lipid soluble, for it to travel in your bloodstream, in your blood, so you have to remember, your blood contains a lot of water. Okay, 55% of your blood composition is plasma. 90% of the plasma is water. So lipid soluble will not easily dissolve in your blood. So in order for the lipid soluble hormone to be transported in your bloodstream, it has to be bind with transport protein first. So kalau tak hormone ni tak boleh nak travel in your blood because it is not water soluble. So in order for the hormone to be transported in your blood, it has to bind with transport protein. But as the hormone reaches the target cell inside, so this part here is the target cells. Okay, so the hormone will be detached from the transport protein. Because the hormone is lipid soluble, it can diffuse through the phospholipid bilayer and enters into the target cell. Itu specialnya kalau apa, itu adalah feature lipid soluble. It enters into the target cell because it can dissolve through the phospholipid bilayer of the target cell. So same goes to here. So the cells producing the hormone and secrete the hormone straight. Tak perlu nak ada vesicle apa fuse ke, tak perlu nak ada exocytosis. Itu adalah untuk water soluble hormone. This is for lipid soluble. Lipid soluble, it can diffuse through the phospholipid bilayer. Okay. Okay, so let's look at the bigger diagram here, the whole mechanism. Okay, so the first one, lipid soluble hormones are carried in the blood attached to a transport protein because it is lipid soluble. It is not water soluble. It has to bind with transport protein when it travels in your blood stream. Okay, so at the target cell, hormone dissociates. It dissociates from the transport protein and pass through the plasma membrane of the target cell because it is lipid soluble. It can diffuse through the phospholipid bilayer. Okay, and then once the hormone is inside the target cell, the hormone bind to receptor protein either located in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus. In this diagram, for example, here the receptor is located inside the nucleus. This receptor can also be located in the cytoplasm, depends lah. So the receptor can either be located in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus. Okay, so receptor is in the cytoplasm. It is known as cytosolic receptor if it's in the cytoplasm. If it's in the nucleus, we call it as the nuclear receptor. So in this case, in this diagram here, it is the nuclear receptor. So once the hormone enters into the target cells, it finds the receptor, it binds to the receptor to form hormone receptor complex. So this is hormone receptor complex. Okay, so the hormone receptor complex then binds to specific site on DNA in the nucleus. This may activate or suppress transcription of specific genes into mRNA. Dia akan stop sama ada transcription translation to occur or activate transcription translation to occur. Okay, so if translation occurs, this leads to the production of another protein inside cells such as enzyme or other protein that the cell needs to produce. Okay, so itulah dia. That is the mechanism. If we look at this diagram here, okay, here, okay, so this is the same example. Okay, so hormone outside, in the interstitial fluid, there will be the hormone that reaches the target cell. Hormone in this case is estrogen or estradiols. The estrogen is lipid soluble hormone, it is steroid hormones. So it can diffuse through the phospholipid bilayer. Okay, diffuse through the phospholipid bilayer. In this case, the receptor is inside the cytoplasm. So hormone bind with the receptor to form hormone receptor complex. So this hormone receptor complex, because it forms in the cytoplasm, it needs to enter into the nucleus. Okay, it needs to enter into the nucleus. Once the hormone receptor enters into the nucleus, it binds to specific region in the DNA. So, for example, this is certain genes. Okay, certain genes to produce certain proteins. Okay, code for the synthesis of certain proteins. So in this case, in this diagram here, the hormone receptor bind to specific gene in the DNA, causes transcription. So this is transcription to occur, leading to the production of mRNA. And then from the mRNA, it leads to the process of translation. So the process of translation will lead to the production of another protein. In this case is this protein betalonogene, okay, betalogene, okay, which is another protein produced by the receptor cells, okay. So itulah dia, okay. In this diagram, it just to show you the different location of the receptor for the lipid hormone. So in this case, for diagram A, is the receptor is located in the cytoplasm. Kalau the next diagram here, the receptor is located in the nucleus. Be it the receptor located in the nucleus or in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus, both condition will lead to the hormone receptor complex to bind to specific gene in the DNA to suppress or activate gene expression. Okay, to suppress or activate gene expression. What is gene expression? Transcription and translation. Kalau activate gene expression, it leads to the cell producing another type of protein. Kalau dia lead to suppression of gene expression, there's no transcription, there's no translation. So that stops the production of certain protein, other protein. Macam itulah. Okay, which is the cellular response lah kan. So in this case, kalau diagram A, we have testosterone diffused through the phospholipid bilayer, binds to receptor protein in the cytoplasm to form hormone receptor complex. It goes into this nucleus, bind to specific gene in the DNA, lead to transcription mRNA, and from mRNA it leads to translation to produce other proteins. Okay, sama juga kalau kat diagram B. So the endocrine cell secretes the hormone, travels in the blood circulation, bind with the transport protein, reaches the target cell, detached from the transport protein, diffuse through the plasma membrane, enters into the target cells, and then goes into straight into the nucleus, because in the nucleus it has a receptor to form hormone receptor complex and regulate gene expression. Sama ada activate or suppress gene expression. Okay, that is a cytoplasmic response for that hormone. Okay. So gambar ni just nak tunjuk perbezaan dari segi location of the receptor je lah for the lipid soluble hormone. Okay. Ini you all kena ingat adalah untuk steroid hormone. Okay. Ada soalan tak so far untuk part yang ini?
Ada, madam.
Okay. Okay, sekejap. Okay, so this is the video I post. Okay, itu adalah mechanism of action. This one is mechanism of action for lipid soluble hormones. Okay, so leading to activation or suppression of gene expression. Okay, activation or suppression of gene expression. So activate gene expression leading to formation, synthesis of other proteins. Okay, so kalau suppress, so it inhibits gene expression, so no other protein produced, okay, from that reaction. Steroid. Yep. Okay. So now we are going to look at the next mechanism of hormone action by the water soluble hormones or hormones that are made up of proteins, for example. Okay. So hormones are secreted by exocytosis and travel in the bloodstream. Yang ini you all kena ingat balik yang kita pernah belajar semester lepas, okay? Pasal exocytosis, endocytosis, how daripada apa nama? Ingat balik pasal endoplasmic system, endomembrane system lah kan. So yang melibatkan apa, from the nucleus, and then from the nucleus it is attached to the rough ER. So the rough ER has ribosome attached kan. So the function of ribosome attached to the rough ER is to synthesize protein and then package into transport vesicle. Transport vesicle, it then carries the protein to the Golgi apparatus to be modified the proteins and then packaged into secretory proteins kan. So this is the secretory protein that contains the protein products. In this case, the protein product is the hormones such as insulin kan. So insulin is produced through that mechanism lah, daripada tadi yang saya cerita tadi kan, from rough ER semua tu modified by the Golgi and then packaged again into secretory, and then this secretory protein containing the hormones will fuse with the plasma membrane. So this process we call it as exocytosis. So this is the process of secreting water soluble hormone into interstitial fluid before the hormone diffuse into your blood capillaries and then travels along your blood circulation. Because it is water soluble hormones, for this hormone it does not require transport protein or carrier protein. It can dissolve inside your blood. Okay, so because it is for example, it is globular protein, it can dissolve in your blood. Okay, so but as the hormone reaches the target cells, as you can see, the target cell, it has receptor for the hormone which is bind to the plasma membrane. For this type of hormone, it cannot enter into the target cell. It will just bind to the receptor on the outside part of the cell. Okay, so hormone are secreted by exocytosis, travel freely in the bloodstream. Travel freely, apa maksud dia? Dia tak perlukan transport protein macam lipid soluble hormone tu tadi. So cannot diffuse through the plasma membrane of target cell because it is water soluble. It cannot penetrate through the phospholipid bilayer, right? And then hormone binds to cell surface receptor. So this is cell surface receptor. And then when this interaction occurs, hormone receptor complex produced, it causes a series of reaction to occur inside cell. Okay, a series of reaction that occurs inside cell, we call it as signal transduction. Okay, what does it say here? When the hormone binds to the receptor, it causes the receptor to change shape. Okay, induces changes in the cytoplasmic molecule and sometimes altering gene transcription. So, chains of event that convert cellular, extracellular chemical signal to specific intracellular response, we call it as signal transduction. Extracellular chemical signal is the hormone itself. Okay, is the hormone itself. Okay, so hormone, which is the extracellular chemical signal, we call it as ligand lah kan, binds to receptor, and then it causes maybe there is this receptor to change shape. When this receptor change shape, it activates another protein inside, another enzyme to be activated, another enzyme to be activated. A series of reaction to occur, we call it as signal transduction. So this signal transduction, a series of reaction that occurs inside cell, can also lead to the activation of certain genes. Nampak ni, dia kata apa? Ni altering gene transcription, dia akan juga boleh mempengaruhi gene expression. Okay. Okay, so let's look at this mechanism kan of enzyme action. kita contohnya kat sini kita ada epinephrine. Epinephrine adalah amines, okay, modified amino acid that is water soluble. Okay, so it is on the outside. Okay, so it binds to the receptor located at the plasma membrane. Okay, so peptide hormone, this hormone we consider it as first messenger. Hormone, by the water soluble hormone, we call it as first messenger. Okay, hanya untuk water soluble hormone. So this hormone, first messenger, binds with G protein couple receptor, okay, which is located on the plasma membrane of target cell. Okay, so once the hormone binds with the G protein couple receptor, it is activated and activates another enzyme. So this enzyme we call it as enzyme adenylyl cyclase. Adenylyl cyclase. Okay, so so if you look at here, this diagram here, G protein couple receptor will cause G protein to be activated, and then this G protein activate adenylyl cyclase. So adenylyl cyclase will convert ATP into CAMP. Okay, CAMP is considered as second messenger. Ingat ini you all kena ingat. First messenger is the hormone. Second messenger when CAMP is produced, which is what is CAMP? Cyclic adenosine monophosphate. Dah hasil daripada ATP ni. ATP converted into CAMP, which is considered as second messenger. So what is the function of second messenger ni, CAMP? It relays signal. Dia causes another series of reaction to occur. Okay, relays a signal that leads to response such as activation of another enzyme. Okay, so this enzyme, for example, it is to activate protein kinase or some other protein, some other enzymes. Okay, so in this case, because it is epinephrine, kita tahu adalah epinephrine ni adalah hormon yang mana dia akan diriliskan bila kita dalam keadaan anxious, terkejut, macam tu kan, dalam keadaan hype, macam tu epinephrine. Okay, epinephrine. Okay, so when your body dalam keadaan yang contohnya terkejut, okay, so your body cell requires a lot of energy, okay, to respond to that state. Alright, so epinephrine. So in this case, the hormone epinephrine causes a series of reaction where it promotes glycogen to break down into glucose to provide instant energy. Macam tu. Contohnya awak jalan-jalan, tiba-tiba terjumpa ular. Contohnya you are in the state of terkejut macam tu kan. So you need instant energy. So that instant energy is due to the release of epinephrine by the adrenal gland. Okay, and then causes instant reaction to occur, which is signal transduction that cause glycogen to break down into glucose to give you instant energy. Okay, to provide instant energy. Macam itulah. Okay, so activation of enzyme, and then change in uptake or secretion of specific molecule, open or close ion channels, rearrangement of cytoskeleton, alter metabolism, or alters transcription of specific genes. So these are the effects of second messenger. These are the effects of second messenger. Okay, it leads to a series of reaction to occur inside cell. Apa-apalah, tak kisah activation of enzyme, it causes ion channel to close or open, it causes rearrangement of cytoskeleton, alters metabolisms, can increase cellular respiration, or it can alter specific gene expression. Okay, so that is the mechanism of water soluble hormone. So yang awak kena take note apa dia, hormone, it binds to receptor on the plasma membrane and triggers a series of reaction to occur inside cell. We call it as signal transduction. Pernah dia tanya, dia bagi gambar macam ni so you have to know yang ni apa nama apa enzyme dia, adenylyl cyclase, and then what is example of second messenger, CAMP, or what is the function of CAMP, this function as second messenger, macam tu lah. Okay, so this is the whole diagram, sama je lah macam tadi. Okay, so epinephrine is a hormone which is secreted for fight or flight action, okay, by the adrenal gland, adrenal medulla. Okay, adrenal medulla. So this is the video. So let's listen up to the video first. Okay, so the last slide for this lecture session, so we're just going to recap on the difference, okay, between the water soluble and lipid soluble hormone lah, kan. So these are the differences between water soluble and lipid soluble hormones. So we just go through kan, kita tengok apa. Kalau lipid soluble hormones, so they are steroid hormones, they can pass through the phospholipid bilayer of plasma membrane. But for the water soluble hormone, because it is water soluble, it cannot pass through or diffuse through the phospholipid bilayer of plasma membrane. Tak boleh. Tak boleh. So it cannot enter into the target cell. So and then for lipid soluble hormone, in order for it to be transported in your blood circulation, it requires to bind to transport protein. Transport protein ni boleh juga guna sebab dia dengan istilah carrier protein. Okay. So required to bind to transport protein or carrier protein to be carried in the blood. For water soluble hormone, because it is globular protein or dissolved amine, so it does not require transport protein when it travels in the blood. Okay, and then for the lipid soluble hormone, the location of the receptor can either be located in the cytoplasm or nucleus of the target cell. But for the water soluble hormone, the receptor are located on the plasma membrane of the target cell. The hormone will just bind on the outside surface. And then kalau lipid soluble, it does not involve the production of CMP. So water soluble hormone, it involves the production of CMP as the second messenger. Primary messenger is the hormone. Okay. And then kalau lipid soluble hormone does not involve activation of protein kinase, okay, by CMP, but for the water soluble it involves the activation of protein kinase. And then lipid soluble hormone does not involve signal transduction. It does not involve a series of reaction to occur, kan. So lipid soluble, no activation of enzyme by protein kinase. Water soluble enzyme is activated by protein kinase. Tengok balik gambar rajah mechanism tu tadi. And then for the lipid soluble hormone, it can lead to activation or suppression of gene expression. Okay. But for the water-soluble hormone, it involves a series of reactions to occur, which is signal transduction cascade effects. A series of reactions to occur inside cell. One hormone is activated to activate another hormone. One enzyme is activated to cause another enzyme to be activated, another enzyme to be activated. A series of reactions to occur inside cell. For the water soluble, and then kalau lipid soluble, the response it leads to transcription and translation. Kan? So kalau it leads to transcription translation, it can produce another protein inside cell. But for the water soluble hormone, it causes cascade effect adalah signal. It involves signal transduction to occur inside the target cell. Okay. So this table it shows you the difference, the comparison between lipid and water soluble hormone. So on our next lecture, we are going to continue with the all these glands and the type of hormone it secretes and the function of each hormone for our next lecture. So far, do you have any question?
No, madam.
Okay, so kalau tak ada, kita stop dulu our lecture session for this evening. Okay, so thank you class.